Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
Exceptionally well, Rory. I find myself excited for another episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've tuned in to episode 126. We've got three topics that we're going to be discussing today, starting off with speaking about feelings linked to counselling skills. That's the thinking is one side of it, but what are we feeling in that moment is the other side. And then we have check-in with CPCAB, where Rory, you spoke with Ray van der Poel, and you spoke a little bit about authenticity. What can we expect from that segment today?
Well, Ray gave us a fascinating insight into how being real and authentic with ourselves can actually impact not only on our mental well-being, but our physical well-being. And he spoke of lots of research around the fact that our physical well-being benefits from us being real and congruent with ourselves.
Like it. And I've read a number of times Carl Rogers using the word authentic when referring to congruence, I guess. So really important in counselling, but also in self. Looking forward to check-in today with CPCAB. And then we're ending episode 126, Rory. We're going to be speaking about the following topic. And I know that I'm just going to say the topic and ears will prick up. And that is accreditation essential? And we'll leave it there. You want to stay tuned for that one because that's an interesting debate. But let's start off about feelings linked to counselling skills, Rory.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? If you go into any kind of interaction with a professional, and they're usually listening to respond. I mentioned this in a recent skills lecture that I delivered, and the crux of it is that we're taught to listen to respond, not listen to hear. And I think one of the really interesting things, and especially for those colleagues who may be coming in from different professions, so maybe they've been in a healthcare profession, maybe they've been in maybe even in a legal profession, and they're coming in, changing their career, moving into counselling. One of the things that is striking and people really do kind of can hit a wall with is the fact that when we're using our counselling skills as either as practitioners or as in class, is that we use feelings. We actually use feelings. We work with a vocabulary of feelings, and it's surprising, Ken, how many people don't have a wide feeling vocabulary.
Yeah, no, I fully understand that. And I don't find it surprising. It is amazing. I agree with you, but I don't find it surprising in that the society we live in at the moment pays very little attention to actually to feelings, to naming feelings. And I kind of maybe subscribe to the thought that we're kind of, as a society, specifically the Western word, feeling illiterate, in that our ways to describe how we are feeling are so very basic. We can say, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm feeling a little under the weather. But when asked to kind of really describe that feeling, it's difficult to do because it's not something that we're encouraged to do in everyday society. So I guess very often we may see a client coming and presenting in counselling, and even if we kind of ask them how they might be feeling, it might be really difficult for them to tell us because they don't have that vocabulary, they don't have the words. And I guess it's important for us as counsellors to learn words that we can put out there so a client can maybe grab onto something and say, yes, it's like that.
Absolutely, and feelings are a great part of who we are, and if they're not taught or kind of attained in childhood, then we can really struggle. My young grandson Jacob, he when he was very little, he bumped his head and he looked at me and I said, that hurts, and he went off and had a cry and we rubbed it better and all that kind of thing. And a few weeks ago he did the same thing and he looked at me and he went, that hurts. He'd learned a feeling vocabulary. He'd learned a feeling vocabulary, and it's something that we teach. In fact, in transactional analysis, they call it the electrode flashing in the kind of thoughts and feelings from the parent to the child. It's called the electrode. So yeah, and you know, we don't really speak a lot with our feelings. Just think about your everyday, you know, going out and about. You may go shopping, you may be dealing with other people, you know, in your wider life. Have a think how many times people use feelings.
Yeah.
Not, is it?
No, and it's really, really important. And the thing with feelings is that they also have intensity related to them. So if I was to say, oh, I'm cross at the moment, or I'm angry at the moment, it's difficult to gauge just with the word angry, how angry. What is the intensity? Where if it was a hi-fi system, what would the volume be on? Would it be on number 2? Would it be on number 11 for those Spinal Tap fans out there? It's that question. So it's about having different ways of describing. So if I said I was annoyed, well, that would be very different to angry, but it can be confused. And if I was to say angry, are there different ways to say it? Well, how about enraged? How about furious? How about irate? How about livid? How about resentful? Maybe that would fall under anger. And these are the feeling words we're talking about as counselors, being able to use more ways to describe a basic feeling. If we were speaking about annoyed, and the client was saying I was annoyed, or was showing signs of that kind of feeling being present with them, we might use aggravated, dismayed, disgruntled, displeased, exasperated, frustrated, impatient, irritated, irked, depending on who they were, depending on kind of what we were sensing. And I'm not kind of pulling these words from my memory here, Rory. I'm cheating. I've got a cheat sheet. It's one of Rory's super duper cheat sheets, actually, that I'm reading from at the moment. And it's a feelings word. It's a feelings list. And it goes through different feelings, and it kind of gives the main feelings. It gives affectionate, engaged, hopeful, confident, excited, grateful, inspired, joyful, exhilarated. But then it goes and deepens on each one of those words. So under exhilarated, blissful, ecstatic, elated, enthralled, exuberant, radiant, rapturous, thrilled. It just gives us more of a feelings vocab as counselors. So if you want to get Rory's super duper handout with all of these feelings words on them, just go to today's episode, and you'll find that by going to our mother website, which is counsellingtutor.com. Find episode 126 of our podcast. Our podcast is easy to find. It's from our top menu. Click on podcast, go to episode 126. All the show notes are there with kind of links out to more information on what we've spoken about today. And you can download Rory's feelings list, a little cheat sheet of feeling words, and you can get that for free by just putting in your email address, and we will send it to you. And of course, if you are already a paid for member of our service, we have a paid for section called the Counselor Resources. Well, you can just log in because that's already been added to your dashboard. But I think it's a really important part of skills, Rory, and maybe a part of skills that is not looked at in depth.
Yeah, and I think just on a final note on this, it's really interesting that when I used to observe, and in fact we both observed students using counselling skills, is that when you use a more logical approach, people go to their heads. They're kind of, you know, they're being with their heads, not with their entire emotional being. So sometimes, you know, I used to say, if you ask how it feels, as opposed to asking a more logical question like, what are you going to do? Actually, people can access the whole of themselves and make the decisions from there, as opposed to just getting really stuck in their heads. I mean, it all comes from the head, you know, all comes from the brain. But sometimes we can kind of narrow the options by just asking someone, well, what are you going to do? As opposed to saying, how do you feel?
So important. And you know, we see that again and again, because as we started with this, society does not openly welcome speaking about feelings. In fact, it kind of, unless they're positive feelings like being happy and joyful, they're to be hidden away, I guess, in Western society is the message. And I think that message is changing now, and people are encouraged more to show those feelings, but learning the words to describe those feelings, welcoming those feelings in your counselling relationship, in your simulated skills sessions, naming those feelings, going to those feelings, it really does take the relationship to a new depth. So seldom there are feelings are recognized in life. Within counseling, we recognize and we welcome those feelings, and that's what makes it truly special. And that special bond is what allows people to, for the very first time in some instances, go, wow, my feelings matter. Somebody cares how I feel, and they get to explore that. But we as counselors, we need the vocab to be able to name it and help them find the right word that matches their feelings. So go and get that list of Rory's. It's very useful.
Yes, absolutely. And and practice it in your skills groups. Share it in your skills groups. Share the list, because it is just so useful. And the bigger vocabulary you have of feelings, I think I'm going to make a bold statement here, Ken, the happier you are. I think if you've got a very wide vocabulary of how you feel, then you can actually share how you feel.
Bingo. We get so many questions on our Facebook group about journaling and how to write. And I'm speaking about maybe your own journal for your own personal development. That's a great place to practice those feeling words, to go away from the basic, oh, I had a happy day today. Well, what else? Dig in. What is that real feeling when you kind of drill under it? So lots to play around with there. And I guess acknowledging our own feelings is about being authentic to self, which, you see what I'm doing, Rory? I'm leading on to our next section, which is a check-in with CPCAB, where you spoke with Ray all about authenticity.
I see what you did there, Ken. Very, very clever. So very good. Yes. So we talked about authenticity, and Ray shares with us some really interesting insights about, what it takes to be real with ourselves and others, and also the benefits. He mentions a psychiatrist called Gabor Mate, who is very popular on the YouTube and the TED Talk circuit, about how when we're authentic with ourselves and real with ourselves and indeed others, what happens is our health, there's benefits to our physical health as well as our mental health. So it's one not really to be missed.
Let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we welcome Ray back. How are you doing, Ray?
I'm doing really well, Rory. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. I've got myself a cup of tea here, which is always welcome. And that's part of my authentic self, hint, 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 about what this segment's about. It's about authenticity and why it's so important.
Yeah, I'm so happy to talk about authenticity today. I came across this YouTube clip on New Vision for Mental Health, and basically, I don't know, some listeners might have come across this person before, Dr. Gabor Mate, and he talks about the struggle of our sort of core drives, of one of our drives being attachment, and another one being this drive for authenticity. And it's a really interesting lecture that he gives around this fight for authenticity that we have due to our attachment needs. Because if we think about it as human beings, if we don't attach when we're born, then actually we don't survive. We're one of the few mammals that needs attachment for food. The other interesting thing is he links this idea of authenticity. The lack of authenticity is linked to chronic illness. Now that is just what I was when I was listening to it. I was thinking, oh, okay, this sounds really interesting. So if I choose attachment over authenticity, I'm now prone to chronic illness. And he gives some 4 risk factors, and I want to share them with you because I'm pretty sure that everybody relates to these. But one of the risk factors is this automatic concern for the emotional needs of others. Yeah. Okay. And people coming into counseling, we want to support, we want to help. But this idea, he gives an example of this person's wife. She's just been diagnosed with breast cancer by the GP. The GP has told her, you've got breast cancer. And her first thought is, who's going to look after my husband? Mm-hmm. So this automatic concern for the needs of others is a risk factor. And the second risk factor is this compulsory, rigid identification with role and responsibility. And he gives an example of a doctor who's diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor works all through his treatment to a few days before he passes away. Who would do that? You've just been diagnosed with cancer, and his identity is so involved and so rigid with his responsibility for his patients that he just forgoes himself. And it's this idea that actually, if you don't look after yourself, you're more prone to illness. And my favorite, and probably the one I'll spend a little bit of more time on, is the suppression of so-called negative emotions.
Oh, yes.
So this gets really interesting now. So this idea that if I internalize my emotional self, so I'll use an example. If, for instance, you had a parent that was really angry all the time, as a child, you want to maintain that attachment with that parent. So you adjust your behavior, you adapt to your environment. So you have all these adaptive behaviors. So I'm going to be really, really good so that people don't scream at me and shout at me. But actually what happens is that sometimes somebody is doing something to you and you want to say no. And if you think about what our emotions do, our emotions are a screen that says, yes, come in closer, or no, go away. But if you can't say go away, then that internalizes. And if you think about the word depression, it's the depression of emotions. Yes. And when you suppress your emotions, effectively you suppress your immune system. That's what Gabor Mate is saying. So we suppress our emotions, it suppresses our immune system, we become more prone to chronic illness. What is that like?
I mean, that's just an incredible insight, and one that I think, I was listening to that, Ray, and I thought, yeah, well, that makes perfect sense, but it only makes perfect sense when someone kind of lays it out in front of you and says, this is what happens. And I think it's one of the things I noticed when I taught students, that they were very, they were almost very apologetic for being in the room, when they came into the level 2. And as you got to the end of the level 4, they were very vocal and very challenging. And, I remember one student saying to me, don't you mind us challenging? I said, no, it means I've done my job properly. Yeah.
Somebody's able to be their authentic self. Yes. They're able to express themselves. They'll be able to say in an adult way, actually, I don't agree with what you've just said, Rory. I believe this. And that is okay. That is so healthy. When I sort of watched this clip of this idea that if we want to form attachments, we need to make sure that we still keep our authentic self. Just one other thing, in his talk, he was talking. He used this example. He was doing this presentation, and he says, "I need a volunteer." And he goes out into the audience, and he says to this lady, "Are you okay if I do my presentation from here?" And he was standing right next to her, and she says, "Oh yeah, no, that's fine." And then he says, "Okay," and he goes really, really close to her, and he says, "How about now?" And she says, "Oh, that's a bit close." He then puts his knee on the lady. He said, "How do you feel now?" And she said, "Oh, that's very close. I don't know how I feel about that." And he said, "Well, what happens if I stand on you?" And she said, No, go away." And I thought that was a brilliant representation of healthy anger.
Yes.
That was a way of you saying, actually, you've gone too far. No.
Yeah.
And this is what he's talking about. If you haven't got a capacity to say no with something like healthy anger, then actually your sense of self is decreasing. You are not being authentic.
Yes.
And not being authentic invites all these other chronic illnesses, because actually when you suppress your emotions, effectively you suppress your immune system. And the link that he makes, which I think is great, and I'm not sure if everybody, all the listeners know this, but the feel-good chemical serotonin?
Yeah.
And when you're depressed, you go to the GP and they might prescribe you some antidepressants that boost your serotonin levels and so on. Well, your gut holds more serotonin than your brain. And
Really?
what he's yeah,
Yeah.
what he is saying is that, before our mental our ability to think, we were emotional animals, and emotional animals react from the gut. We have this ability throughout our whole system. Our mind and our body are so interlinked that our emotions come first. And what he was saying is, if you don't follow your gut, then you're not being authentic. And so this sort of intermeshing of mind and body was just really nice. And like you say, somebody explaining it very clearly was very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's so useful, and it just replicates. I don't know what your experience as a tutor has been, but certainly mine, Ray, is that people become so much more free after doing counselling courses, to the point, I think, that half of my cohort when I taught separated from their partners, and there was, it was variable through the courses that I taught, where people just wouldn't put up with things anymore. And I used to say, as I'm sure a lot of tutors do, when we were talking about people, progressing onto the diploma, I would say, this may very well alter relationships that you have with others, and it should come with a health warning, and here it is. And it's a little bit like the Matrix. You go down the rabbit hole and there's no coming back. But it's so interesting. And don't we just see, Ray, presentations with clients where clients come in, they've got a lot of somatic symptoms, but actually those start to kind of ease when they find their authentic self, their real self.
Oh, for sure. I think that search that the client has for their authentic self, but also as a student studying, that search for the authentic self as well, getting back in touch with who you are, your gut feelings. Great book. It's just come into my head. Great book by a guy called Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. If you're interested in reacting from the gut, great book. I'd recommend that highly as well. But that's by the by. I've just got one last thing, Rory. I know we might be coming up to time. But the fourth risk factor is responsible for others' feelings and never disappointing them.
Ooh.
Just leave it at that. If you can't disappoint others, you're putting yourself at a health risk. Just digest that for a moment.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that's so well put together, so well observed. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in listening land. I'm sure the listener will be saying, that is just so true. So as always, Ray, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rory. Great to speak to you.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
He's really good. I always love listening to Ray, and I was knocked out by that assertion that we have more serotonin in our stomachs than we do in our brains. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? So what's your view of being authentic? Why not share your views of that on our Facebook page? And if you don't know where our Facebook page is, go into Facebook, type Counselling Tutor. You'll find our Facebook page. It's a closed group. But if you knock on the door, we'll let you in. And as you walk through the door, you will be in an environment with thousands of other people in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We've got students like yourselves, qualified practitioners like yourselves. We've got tutors, we've got supervisors, and we have sometimes general members of the public who are really interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Why don't you share what your experiences of being authentic are and the impact it's had on you? we'd love to hear that, wouldn't we? We'd love to
definitely
hear those stories.
We hang out on our Facebook page all the time. We have a team of moderators. All of the team that work for Counselling Tutor are on that Facebook page, and we love engaging with you, our audience. And it's a great place for you to ask the questions you want to ask of CPCAB as well. They are our good friends. They've kind of partnered up with us for this season of our podcast, and they want to hear your questions so they can answer that for you as well. So any questions you have, pop them in there. Any suggested topics for the podcast. This is your podcast. We want to speak about the stuff that interests you. And this next topic is a topic that you bring up on our Facebook group again and again and again. We're so glad to bring it today. And I'm going to bring it with the music, Rory. Here it goes. Dun, dun, dun. Is accreditation essential? Dun.
Well, yeah, I feel like I should kind of like bounce in now with that introduction. But is accreditation essential? It might be useful just sharing what accreditation is. Here in the UK, we do not have a regulated counselling system. So I was at a conference the other day speaking with colleagues from across the pond in America. So if you're listening in America, hello to you. And in America, they have a licensing system. You have to be licensed by the state, and you have to do a state exam, and you get effectively a license to practice. Here in the UK, we don't have that system, and we don't have any form of accreditation. And indeed, the word counsellor isn't a protected title, so anybody could set themselves up as a counsellor. So lots of ethical bodies. I'm thinking of the BACP, the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy. I'm doing this in order. The National Counselling Society, the UKCP, they have their own accreditation system, and effectively you practice for a number of hours, and then you evidence your continual professional development, your presentation at supervision, how many times you've been to supervision. You have to write. You have to write about your modality. Different ethical bodies have different ways of gaining accreditation, and you submit a body of work like a portfolio or a viva to them, and a fee, of course. And what happens is that if you pass, you become accredited. You get a little badge, or you can call yourself accredited, which means that the ethical bodies have overlooked your work and said that they believe that you're working to a standard. So the question we're asking is accreditation essential? So nobody has to have accreditation. However, some employers are now asking for accreditation. And you'll notice in job specifications, it's becoming more kind of pressing in, I think, in our National Health Service. A lot of the job adverts I've seen are asking for accreditation. So that's a slightly interesting shift, I think, in the way that employers are looking for candidates.
100%. So the adverts generally read accreditation or working towards accreditation before they will even see you. And we hear that from so many students. You reach the end of your study journey, you graduate, and it's tricky to find work because they're looking for people who have accreditation or are working towards accreditation. So there's that kind of balancing act there that we walk for a little while just after that initial graduation, of course. But it's interesting. Here's my view on it. And this is not about my view, and it's not about your view, Rory. It's about the view of you, our listener. And we'd love to hear from you again. Bring this topic up and give us your views on our Facebook group. But my view is that it is a good thing, and for the purpose of that, it ensures that when you finish study, you don't stagnate. You finish your study. If you're working towards accreditation, you're having to learn. You're having to evidence that you're continuing your professional development. That you're continuing your learning. You're not just taking what you've learned, parking it one side, and going, right, I've got that. There is a check and balance system to show that you've kind of done something. That you're continuing to work, that you're continuing to be supervised, and to reach a standard. And I believe, just personally, that's a good thing that keeps us learning.
Yes, and I think I'll take a contrary view, and this is a purely personal view, is that I think some people like accreditation. I think some practitioners like the idea that they're evidencing their professional competence and their commitments to the the profession. The other view is, of course, is that nowadays we have the professional register, which means that before we had this kind of what we call self-regulation, which effectively means that when you, certainly if you're a member of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy as a student, you have to take the Certificate of Proficiency test, which is like a test that allows you to become a full member. It's done online, and you answer a number of questions, multiple choice questions, and if you pass, then you get a full kind of a professional membership. It's not accreditation, but it allows you to have a full professional membership, and you can be audited. So I did my CLP test. It's called Certificate Proficiency. About 3 or 4 years ago. And, at any time I can get a letter through the door asking me to evidence my CPD, my attendance at supervision, and also my insurance, my indemnity insurance. And I think that's a really good thing. My view is that accreditation is a little bit like taking your driving test. Everybody who takes the driving test hits the standard to pass. If you don't hit the standard, you don't pass. But if you drive along the road, you see some people who clearly have forgotten the lessons they learned when they were driving. So it's not an ideal all magic wand solution, but it does for those who are accredited. And congratulations to you, because it is a lot of work. It does show the general public that someone's taken the effort to evidence their professional practice. But is it essential? Well, lots of employers still aren't asking for accreditation. And of course, different ethical bodies have different ways of accrediting. So I think it's well worth, if you're in maybe in the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, you may be with the National Counselling Society or the United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapists. They'll all have different ways of becoming accredited, and you have to continually evidence it. So every so often, you're asked to resubmit work and your supervision hours. So yes, it's an interesting debate. But why not carry that debate in the Facebook group? There's a lot of people who are pro accreditation. There are a lot of people who are, I won't say anti, but don't see the importance of it. Be interesting to see what you, the listeners, think.
Yeah, I think it's good to have those different views, the different camps on that. For me, the word accreditation is the word accreditation. Take that away. The bit that I like about it is the continuing professional development, in that we speak about this all the time, Rory. What we practice in counselling is changing all the time. Research is coming out all the time. And there is an onus on us. There really is, as practitioners, to keep up to date with what's going on. So that CPD side of it, that's the bit I like about accreditation. It just encourages that. 450 hours of practice, if we're looking at the BACP, plus the work that you're doing, plus that being reviewed on a regular basis. And I'm thinking about the counselling as a profession, keeping the standards high, and who knows what it will look like in 5 years' time. Maybe it will be regulated. Maybe there will be a licensing board that kind of oversees counsellors. It's an interesting time, Rory, to be a counsellor, and I'm speaking, of course, here in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely, Ken. And you make a very, very good point. If you're pro or not so keen on the accreditation route, one thing is for certain: continual professional development is something that is expected in our profession. Passing your qualification, well, that's really great, something to celebrate, is not the end. It is the beginning, and clients deserve to have practitioners who are at the cutting edge of research, and the research is coming thick and fast. When I graduated in 2004, trauma and the ideas around trauma were not very well defined. Now there is just so much information out there, and people really need to access it. And of course, if you're a member of ethical bodies, not accredited but a member, you can be asked to provide a CPD log at any time. And if you don't submit it, you'll lose your professional membership. You're at risk of losing your professional membership. So we can agree there. CPD is absolutely essential.
You're listening to this right now. This is episode 126 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And just by listening to it, you're engaging in CPD as a practitioner. If you're qualified, you can log the time that you listen to today's episode and all the rest of our episode as part of your CPD, because CPD it is. You're informing your practice. You're asking questions. You're getting involved in discussions, the same as the Facebook group. Join us on our Facebook group. Get onto our website, counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab. This is episode 126. You can get the show notes there. You can get Rory's super duper feelings download list there. You can have the link there through to our friends at CPCAB to get a little more depth of the topic that was covered on authenticity today. It's all happening on our website. We are so grateful that you tune in and you choose to use your time listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, because without you, it would just be you and me, Rory, chatting away, and that would just be two mad old men.
Yes, it would be, Ken, and it would be very nice. It would be very nice, but you're absolutely right. Well, what an episode. We started off with talking about how feelings link with counselling skills, and how essential it is to have a feeling vocabulary. There's even a free handout if you go to our mother website. Download that, and you can use that in your classroom, share it with your peers. Then we checked in with our good friend Ray at CPCAB. He talks about authenticity and how that can impact on your emotional and mental well-being. And then finally, we had an interesting debate about accreditation. And we'd love to hear what your thoughts are in our Facebook page. And as always, hey, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.